Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Event Industry News Podcast. My name is James Dixon, and as always, I wish you a good morning or good afternoon or good evening, whenever or wherever you join the podcast from. And for me, this is the first podcast of the year. We are recording this on Wednesday, the 29th of January, and as many of our podcast listeners and followers will be aware, we record the Event Industry News podcasts once a month. We put one day aside and we do all of our recording for the month. So this is my first one of the year. So belatedly to all of our podcast followers, a very happy new year to you, and best of luck to everybody for 2020. And on with the first recording of the year. My guest today joins me from Copenhagen. He is a professional keynote speaker, a former newspaper editor and director of marketing, and his name is Samuel Scott. Samuel, thanks for joining the podcast today and welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
And as I said to our podcast listeners there, you are in Copenhagen at the moment, in Denmark, but just give us a bit of background to your own professional career, because you're a well-traveled man.
Okay, yeah, sure. So basically, I was born and raised in America. I'm Israeli. I live in Tel Aviv. And about twice a month, I travel and give speeches at businesses and conferences. And just at the moment, yes, I am in my hotel room in Copenhagen, about 4 hours away from giving a speech here.
Okay. And could we ask what the event is that you're going to be speaking at today?
Oh yes, it's a European B2B event agency called Management Events, based I think in Sweden.
Excellent. Well, best of luck with that today. And once again, thanks for joining the podcast. And it's great to have somebody on whose title is professional keynote speaker. As I mentioned in your introductions there, you are a former newspaper editor and a director of marketing that has progressed into this current profession of being a keynote speaker. And we're going to be speaking on the podcast today to Samuel about best practices and about, I suppose, some of the experiences that he has had being a keynote speaker. But are we okay to maybe just delve into a bit of background first of all, Samuel, and maybe look at your history as a newspaper editor and director of marketing, and just get an idea about how one profession has led to the other and how it leads you to where you are today?
Sure, no problem. So basically, my first career, I was a journalist in Boston. And then when the economy crashed, I was doing my MBA at the time, and I really liked the marketing classes. So I thought, what the hell, I'll give this marketing thing a shot. So like I said, I'm Israeli, so I went to Tel Aviv, and I got involved in the high-tech world there. And my last job was as the first director of marketing for Logs.io, IT log analysis platform.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically, I was first a journalist, then I went into marketing, and now I cover the marketing industry as a trade journalist in my biweekly column for The Drum. So basically now today, I write and I speak about the marketing industry with the mindset of a neutral journalist who has nothing to sell.
And that's a really sort of key point to raise here straight off the bat is nothing to sell. Because as we move into sort of talking about, I suppose, best practices and speakers, many of our podcast listeners will have organized events where they've invited speakers and they require a lineup of speakers for their event. And it's very, very rare that you get somebody who, even with the best planned and the best delivered keynote speech, doesn't have something to sell. And that's I suppose something that organizers particularly need to be very careful of, isn't it?
Oh yes, definitely, because, well, here are just a few examples. If you bring on someone who works for an agency, a marketing agency, then they will be the speaker will be promoting the services or types of services that the agency provides. If you bring on an in-house marketer, say for a marketing software company, then that person will be promoting in some way the software that the company sells to the audience. So even if you're not paying a speaker per se, nobody wants to do this work for free. So they're always going to try and find some benefit out of it, whether it's, again, pitching their agency or their product. Now just me on my end, speaking is my job. I don't have a book. I don't typically offer direct consulting services. I'm not working for any company with a product to sell. So I actually have nothing to sell except my ideas. So that's how I sort of approach event organizers, that I'm not there to sell a book or something like that.
And I was reading prior to the podcast today. I was looking at your website and looking at some of the testimonials, and there was one in particular that leapt out at me that I won't use the precise language because there was some choice words in there, but essentially it was saying, thank goodness for somebody who actually is speaking the truth. And just picking up on what you just said there about with nothing to sell and maybe coming at it from a neutral point of view, I guess that puts you in a position where you can give very honest opinions and assessments of what you think is good, bad, indifferent within the world of marketing, and perhaps give people an honest assessment that they may not get elsewhere.
Right. Well, I'll tell you one thing that comes to mind. So when I was a journalist in Boston, I covered in part local city and state politics. And, I thought I encountered enough BS when I covered politics. But then I became a business journalist. And to be honest, there is, I think, even more BS in the business world than in politics. So I don't want to name any names. Well, I do that in my column enough. But it's just, you would be amazed at some of the things I hear people say and do, either from a podium or, in interviews or even in blog posts. I mean, so there is ample material for someone like me to, write about and sometimes expose, sometimes to congratulate and commend, or somewhere in the middle. Whether, again, I do it from a stage or from my pen or my computer.
Absolutely. Something that's just sprung to mind is the subject of fact checking, and it was something that cropped up last year, either in a podcast or in one of the articles on Event Industry News. And it was a discussion that arose related to facts that are quoted by people who are delivering keynote sessions at conferences, and how often they will stand up there and with a voice, a very authoritative voice, state statistics and facts to back up whatever it is that they're saying within their session, and how people very rarely actually check those facts and statistics and whether or not they're true. I'm just curious whether or not that's something that you've come across in your particular area, and whether or not that's something that you ever address in your own sessions.
Oh, yes. Actually, my most recent column in The Drum that came out about a week and a half ago, I actually exposed this big PR myth in the high-tech startup world, which is just a perfect example. So here's the gist. So many high-tech startups out there, they say, our hiring rate is, less than Harvard University's acceptance rate. We are an elite company and blah, blah, blah. And I found like 30 examples of companies saying exactly that same line, because Harvard's acceptance rate is like 4 or 5%. And like, well, our hiring rate is 3%, so we're better than Harvard. And so I did some research, and guess what, 99% of all businesses in the world have a lower hiring rate from CVs received to hiring than Harvard. No one is special. I mean, because think about it. It's ludicrous. I mean, unless you're in a high turnover industry, such as food service or telemarketing or something, what percentage of people walking in the door or CVs you get over email do you hire? Again, it's very, very few all the time. So just because your percentage rate is lower than Harvard, it doesn't mean anything, but people keep repeating this BS line.
Yeah.
Oh, that's one of my favorite examples.
Absolutely. And this, as I said, the fact-checking thing has sprung to mind, particularly because just prior to Christmas, we had a general election in the UK. And one of the huge things to come out of that election was the whole idea of fact-checking. And when politicians would quote statistics and economic figures, et cetera, for the first time, I think people really experienced this idea that people were delving into the internet and actually fact-checking things. And that's why it sort of linked back to this subject that cropped up in Event Industry News last year about people who stand up. And I suppose it goes back to this idea that everybody's got something to sell. And like a politician, they will take a set of figures and manipulate those figures or statistics to their own benefit. And you can give the same set of figures, as I've said before in this podcast, to two different people, and they will interpret it two completely different ways for their own gain. And it's something that inevitably goes on in the world of marketing as well, when people have got something to sell.
Oh, of course, because what I see all the time is that people just cite numbers in a vacuum. They don't give any context, and the context is what matters. Because I could say, you know, my company, our conversion rate on our website is, you know, 25%. Woohoo! But again, 25% doesn't mean anything by itself, because, you know, I would have to know, well, what are the conversion rates of other similar companies in the same industry? You know,
Sure.
you have to compare numbers, but no one does that. And let's see what else. Look, think about like, oh, my favorite is revenue and profits. Okay, so I won't name any names. If people read my column, they can find out who I talk about all the time. But there is a certain marketing software company out there that says, you know, our revenue, you know, keeps increasing every single year, and you know, we have revenues of, you know, tens of millions of dollars, or I mean, a lot more than that. But you know, when you look at the numbers, the actual income statements, this huge marketing software company, on average, loses around, I think, $40 million a year. This is a net income loss of $40 million a year. And last year, that net income loss increased to $60 million a year. So this huge company that pretends we're so successful and we are huge and we've grown so much and our stock keeps going up, they do nothing but lose more and more money every single year because they're quoting numbers out of context. And I don't understand how this happens, because, I mean, look at WeWork, this huge bubble that just imploded. You know, people quote revenue numbers today, but they never quote profit. And it frankly scares me, because, you know, growth that isn't really deserved, you know, companies that grow so quickly and so much that just lose money, that has been one of the main sources of every economic crash going back 50 years. And frankly, it does scare me when people, you know, get so excited about growth, and when that growth turns out to be empty, what we see what happens.
I've just found that article, actually, and for anybody who's got, you know, instant access to the internet whilst they listen to this podcast, which I'm sure you will, if you just search for the drum, Samuel Scott, and Harvard, the article should pop up. As I said, we're recording this on the 29th of January. The article was published on the 21st of January. And just a quick scan through it whilst you were making your last comment, Samuel, it's my first instance is this is something I'm definitely going to read once we finish recording, because it does touch on some of the things that we were asking. One of the things that I want to talk about today as well is from a best practice point of view. I guess you are in a semi-luxurious position, going back to what you're saying about not having anything to sell as such when you are asked to come and speak. But does the structure of your keynote session, when you are asked and invited to come and deliver it, broadly speaking, stay the same, or how is it changed from event to event to make it relevant to the audience, or is it relevant to all audiences?
Sure. So basically, I have a set of, you might say, overall themes that I typically address, and I take, you know, and usually an organizer will take one of those themes and say, you know, oh, I'd like a speech on this, and then I will customize it for that event or that country.
Sure. And does it, I guess that from a business point of view, because I read a few years ago that really the best keynote speakers are the ones who don't just, you know, change it, you know, based on the event. A lot of people, and again, I don't know what the statistics are on this, I won't quote them for fear of being fact checked, but as somebody who works in the events industry and has worked at a lot of conferences, I would say that the majority of people that I've dealt with prepare their sessions probably in the 48 hours prior to when they're actually going to stand on stage and deliver it.
Well, either I'm doing something very right or very wrong, because I think I'm the exception. Because this is my job, I take it very seriously. I actually rehearse, you know, one of my main keynotes in my flat every single day. Like say if you're in a band, you want to practice a set, you know, at least once a day, once every couple of days.
Of course.
I give a speech in my flat to myself basically almost every single day, just to keep doing it. So I don't just do the whole thing 2 days in advance.
Absolutely. And what may be a very strange question, but one that I think is particularly relevant. Do you find that by rehearsing it and therefore knowing it, almost like an actor would learn a script to a play, that you don't turn around as much and look at the screen behind you?
Well, no, I mean, I personally never do that because you don't want to turn your back to the audience. But one thing I ask for is to have one of those monitors, like sort of on stage center.
Sure,
Like
yeah, a comfort
facing me.
monitor, yeah.
Oh, exactly right. So
Yeah.
basically, I just have one of those in front of me with showing the current slide and my notes, and so I just use that. I
Sure.
barely even look at it sometimes.
The reason that I ask it, and it is a sort of a loaded question, because you're an experienced speaker, and again, this is maybe a bit of advice from me, but I see an awful lot of people who, when they're underprepared or nervous about delivering a session, probably because they have only put it together in the 48 hours prior to the actual event itself, that they are guilty of constantly turning around, whether they be stood at a lectern or stood, just in the center of the stage with a clicker. They will constantly be turning around and looking at the screen behind them, almost as a safety net, almost as sort of double check, is it on the right slide? What am I speaking about? And that, to me, the constant turning around always suggests somebody who is underprepared for their session, because they shouldn't need to be double checking it all the time if they're 100% prepared. Because very rarely do you have somebody who comes to deliver a keynote session who doesn't know what they're talking about. They'll know the subject matter. They could probably stand in a bar with a beer after the event and talk all night about it without turning around once. But it's almost like a reflex action that people do when they are underprepared for a session, that they're constantly turning around. I find it's a strange trait.
Oh yeah, definitely, because not knowing, obviously this example is hypothetical, but that does show a lack of a preparation. And actually, if you want my number one tip for event organizers, there's, one thing that I would suggest for both ends is that both speakers and organizers need to be prepared and need to communicate all expectations and needs very far in advance, because basically my number one rule is that neither the speaker nor the event organizer wants to be surprised, because surprises in this profession are almost always a bad thing. Can I just tell you a short story from
Please do. Please do.
So basically, I was at this huge event in Russia. I believe it was about 1,500 people in the audience. And I'm the first speaker, keynote speaker on the first day. I'm opening the entire event. I get there to the venue, I think at about 8 o'clock. I go on at 9.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm walking backstage. So, they're micing me up. Turns out that it was a headset mic, and the headset doesn't fit, or there's something wonky with it. And I love British slang, by the way.
Yeah.
And so it keeps falling off my head. It doesn't stay on. So they have to run and find a hand mic, and they just shove a hand mic in my hand, and I've never used one before. So I'm like, where do I hold this? How far away from my mouth? What do I do? I was a little bit worried, because, they just had to, get rid of the headset at the last minute. So I'm like, okay, I've got a hand mic. I'll figure it out, whatever. And then, what was it? So I got the hand mic. I go out on stage. Oh, and then, right before I go on stage, they give me the clicker. So it's 1,500 people in front of me. My intro video plays, and they're all looking at me, and I walk out on stage, and I say my opening joke, and then I click to the first slide, and you won't believe what happened. The clicker, the battery was dead.
Yeah. Dear.
And I'm thinking to myself, oh bleep.
Yeah.
So basically, I've got a hand mic that I don't really not comfortable with using, and the clicker is not working. I can't go through my deck, and all these people are staring at me. And so basically, I just had to. I actually signaled the AV people who were in the balcony. I had to gesture, can you roll the next slide, yourselves?
Of course, yeah.
Oh God, I felt so bad for the organizer, even though I'll tell you why. I believe it was it was their fault because they weren't prepared.
Of course.
But I'm there to do a job, and I felt like I failed. But the organizers were it's understandable. We didn't know the battery was dead in the clicker. It was fine, but I felt terrible. And so basically, my number one piece of advice for organizers is to check everything the day before the event, or at least a couple hours before the event. Check the headset, check the clicker, go through the deck. when I go to an event, I always find the AV people, my favorite people in the world, because they help me do the job, and I make friends with them. I bring them coffee, everything. And so I go through my deck with the AV people, and I check any videos I have to make sure they're going to play, any animations play, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. Like, I do this at every single event. I check everything. And it just amazes me when speakers don't do this, even other professional speakers that I know, because they just show up and they expect everything to go right.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's a fantastic point to raise, because we talk, as we have done today and on previous episodes of the podcast, about best practices for the speakers and how to be prepared and all the rest of it. Now, unfortunately, if you go in there completely prepared and 100% confident of what you're going to do, and then you're presented with a number of variables that you weren't prepared for that are out of your control, that's not going to help you at all as a speaker. And as an event organizer, and as somebody who has, worked as a technician at events, who has done AV, but has also worked as a coordinator alongside other AV people, that the best thing you can do is be prepared and put your speakers in the most comfortable scenario possible to allow them to flourish on that stage when they step onto it. And I think that there are great technicians out there and people who can make the equipment work. But actually, when you're dealing with keynote speakers in this particular example, I think one of the best things that you can be as a technician, as an AV person, is personable with people, to be able to communicate and talk to them, and because people are nervous, aren't they? And you've probably worked with hundreds and hundreds of different AV guys, and the ones that will stand out to you, the ones who do their technical side of their job really well, but who are also really easy and pleasant to work with.
Oh yeah, definitely. Because I've had AV people personally come up to me afterward and say, thank you for going through your deck with us. Nobody ever does this, and we get blamed if something doesn't work. So they were thanking me for doing this. And because it helps me to do my job, it helps them to do their job. And again, I just wish more speakers would do that. So that sort of goes into like my number 2 piece of advice, if you'd like, on
Sure.
And this is more on the admin side. Like personally, I have so much respect for event organizers, because all of you are juggling like 100 different balls all at the same time whenever you run an event. So it's really hard. I mean, it's really easy for some things to slip through the cracks. So one best practice that I have personally is to gather all the admin stuff in one place for both of our reference, me and my contact. Like, for example, I have a template that is a Google Doc, and this Google Doc has spaces for me and my contact to fill out everything, from the venue address, contact details, my bank transfer details, local transfer details, the speech topic, the conference theme, conference hashtags, anything and everything that we both need to know for my talk. It is all in this one sheet Google Doc. And whenever I book a new event, I just make a copy of this Google Doc, email it to them and say, hey, can you fill out your half? I'll fill out my half. And anything and everything we need is all in this one sheet. And it makes my life and their life so much easier. So I would really recommend that people do something like that if they don't already.
Absolutely. And I suppose that is that born out of having had experiences where organizers have not asked you those details? Because I would say, some organizers are brilliantly prepared and will actually make a concerted effort to request that information from their speakers, from all of them that want to know all of it. Others maybe less so. So I'm curious to know, does that level of preparation that you proactively take come from experiences where those things haven't been done by the organizers?
Yes, I'll give one example where there was just a miscommunication. So for example, in this one sheet, there's also a column or a row, for, payment terms, contract details.
Sure.
And this comes from one experience I had. So, I gave a speech in, where was I? Hold on. Sorry, Amsterdam.
Okay.
And I forget sometimes where I've been. So basically, the organizer said, yeah, we'll send you your fee, after the conference. I'm like, okay, fine, cool. And so basically the conference is over. I send my invoice and I never hear from them. Turns out my contact went on holiday for like a month right after the conference. And then when she got back to the office, she sent me an email. Oh, I just forgot to tell you, our accounts payable department, they have a policy of a net 90. and that means they don't pay invoices until 90 days after they receive them. So basically, my contact gave accounts payable my invoice a month after the event when she got back from holiday, and then they paid me 90 days from that day. So I didn't get paid for about 4 or 5 months. And I know different companies have different payment terms, but it would have been nice to know that at the beginning. Just because it threw me off. It felt like there was a miscommunication.
Yeah, but that's another, I suppose, a bugbear of mine. But I always find it fascinating that in that particular scenario, the person paying can dictate to you what their payment terms are. And I always find it hilarious that if you went into a restaurant and they presented you with the check or the bill at the end of the meal, and you said, right, my payment terms are 90 days.
Exactly.
You wouldn't, it just wouldn't happen. And yet in the world of business, we accept this other way of thinking where the person paying the person for the service that they've provided can dictate when that person is going to get paid. And I always find that very, very, very strange. And I know it is what it is, and you're never going to change that in business. But, as I'm sure thousands of other people have had the same thoughts over the years, that it's a strange one with payment terms. And on the subject of that, one thing I'm again would like to ask is this current role that you have as a professional keynote speaker. And again, my experience of conference speakers and is that the vast majority of them are unpaid. They are invited to present or deliver a session at a conference or an expo or a convention, whatever it may be. And the likelihood is that they will be unpaid to do that. And this ties right back in, I suppose, almost to what we were talking about at the beginning, which is that they've likely got something to sell. Regardless of how they spin their session, the chances are they've probably got something to sell. And are organisers doing themselves a disservice by not paying for the vast majority of the speakers that they invite to come to their conferences? Are they leaving themselves more open to the scenario of a speaker stepping on stage and effectively putting a sales pitch out for their business?
Well, full disclosure, since this is my job, I am biased. I'm sure everyone knows that. But my simple take is you get what you pay for. And, no one's going to, well, I mean, okay, first of all, I'm sure everyone knows this too. Like, creating a speech, it's a lot of work. I couldn't tell you the number of hours that go into it before I walk out on stage. It's work. And it just always fascinates me when so many events out there don't want to pay for someone doing work for them that makes them money. Because, conferences, are either standalone events that want to make a profit, or they're used for marketing purposes by businesses or what have you. So the speakers are there to help the company, and I think they should be compensated for helping the company. But again, I'm biased. So, but you are right in the overall point that no one is going to do all this work, not to get some benefit. And for people like me, the benefit is, a check. And for other people, it's to sell something.
Sure.
So you're always going to pay in some way. Either you're going to pay in money, or you're going to pay by having a speaker, even in a very subtle, inoffensive way, trying to sell something. You just have a choice of which one you want to do.
Sure. And one thing that I noted in your biography, Samuel, is that utilizing the experience that you've got as a journalist, both previously and now in your column that you produce for The Drum, and your experience in marketing. One thing it says is you perhaps show or talk to businesses, conferences, universities about the true present and future of the marketing industry as a neutral observer. I'm just curious to get your take on where you do see the future of the marketing industry, because I talk to a lot of agencies through the podcast. We are constantly talking to and finding out about people who've got an opinion on where they see marketing going. But in the same way that you talked about speakers often having something to sell, people will often put a slant on things based on their own particular interest and their vested interest as a business. Where do you genuinely see the future of marketing going in the digital age?
A couple points on that. So first of all, again, I wrote a column on this topic as well, but I really do not like the word digital, because digital is just a type of technology. It uses, binary ones and zeros to do something.
Sure.
And the thing is, like today, almost all TV signals that your sets get in your living rooms are no longer analog; they're digital.
Of course.
Radio is going digital, not analog. And again, every channel and medium online, that's obviously all digital. So really, to use the phrase digital marketing or digital age, it doesn't make any sense anymore because everything is digital. So that's my first point. My second point is that, even though, everything is now using digital technology, individual channels still have the pros and cons. Like, for example, like TV has its pros and cons, so does radio, so does print, so does social media, so does PPC. Every Marcom channel out there has its pros and cons. And for example, some are really good for brand building at the top of the funnel, and some are very good for what used to be called direct response, and now people call it lead generation or whatever at the bottom of the funnel. Like, for example, TV is probably the best brand building medium that has ever been invented, but it's less good at bottom of the funnel direct response most of the time. In contrast, and also event sponsorships are also very good at brand building, but not so much getting people to buy something right now. Now, in contrast, online channels specifically, take AdWords or Facebook or whatever, they're very good at bottom of the funnel activity, getting people to take some type of action right now, and also in tracking and measuring it. So what I think is that basically, actually, marketing and Marcom doesn't really change that much. What changes is the channels that we have available to use. Like, for example, we didn't have TikTok, I think, probably 3 or 4 years ago. Now it's an option if we want to use it or not use it. But, still, the whole marketing process, from product, price, distribution, and promotion, that doesn't change. Your marketers will always have to, study the market, look for a hole in it, think about pricing, think about, the product. That will never change because human beings never change. But what we see is that the promotion tactics can change.
Absolutely. It's interesting you say that the promotion tactics can change. So just to pick up on that, I had the radio on just the other day, and I was listening to a radio station through my smart speaker at home. And radio advertising is fundamentally not changed, has it? You have the radio show, and then they break for 2 or 3 minutes, and there are a selection of 30-second adverts that run. But what I just noted the other day that I'd never realized before is that the advert on this national radio station quoted specifically to visit my local store in my town. And that's where the subtle changes, isn't it? The actual style of advertising has not changed, but how they can actually direct it has.
Exactly. My basic take is that, the need for strategy and actual strategy, not what people think is strategy, that will never change, but it's the tactics that can change. Because the tactics come and go, and for each company or each brand, they're going to change. But the big picture, the strategy, the need for strategy will never change.
We've been talking on the podcast today to Samuel Scott. Samuel is a professional keynote speaker and has joined us on the podcast today from Copenhagen, based out of Tel Aviv. Samuel, it's been brilliant having you on the podcast today. Before we wrap up and we let you go and prepare for your session today, if any of our podcast followers want to get in touch with you and find out a little bit more about you and maybe speak to you about what it is that you do directly, how can they find you? Social media or website or otherwise?
Yeah, sure. Well, again, thank you for having me as well. It's been a pleasure. My website is samueljscott.com, but you can just Google Samuel Scott Marketing or whatever. And I'm also Samuel J. Scott on Twitter. And you can just search for Samuel Scott on Twitter or LinkedIn as well. Very simple.
And also, I should point out, go and get onto the drum.com and search for Samuel's regular bi-weekly, I think you said, column
Yes.
that he writes for The Drum. So it's a really interesting subjects on there, and one of which we've actually spoken about earlier on today's podcast. If you are listening to today's podcast via your favorite podcast platform, don't forget to head over to eventindustrynews.com, where you can see video versions of all of our podcasts. And while you're on there, you can also check out some of the latest news, features, and special supplements that Event Industry News is producing. Of course, conversely to that, if you're watching today's video podcast, hello to you all, and head over to your favorite podcast platform and downloader, and you can access the audio versions of all of our podcasts to listen to whilst you're out and about on site or on your commute to and from the office. That brings us to the end of today's episode. Our thanks once again to our guest today, Samuel Scott. My name is James Dixon, and we will see you on the next episode of the Event Industry News podcast. Thank you and goodbye.